Welcome to Shane East Meets, which is a special series from the Audiobook Lovin Podcast, where I, Shane East, get to meet some of your favourite people from the romance arena of audiobooks. We hope you love this episode, and of course, the Audiobook Lovin Podcast is brought to you by Viviana, Enchantress of Books. So hello and welcome to the second ever Shane East Meets. I am here with Ava Harrison, the USA Today best-selling author, also known as she told me, Kick-Ass Ava, or Kick-Ass Ava, depends how you want to go with that, or in my opinion, a fun boozing partner.
I
hello.
like fun boozing partner. Hello.
Hi, hello, fun boozing partner. How are you? It sounds like you've been boozing recently. You told me your voice has gone up the wall.
So it's funny because I think the worst thing that could probably happen to you before scheduling a podcast with Shane East is that you would catch a bout of laryngitis. And so that's what happened to me. However, my good friends, authors Lee Shen and Parker S. Huntington, told me it actually works better this way because now I have a sexy, raspy voice to go with the whole persona of writing romance novels. So I'm going to use that as like, I have sexy, raspy voice.
You do have. I would concur with that. It's true because there's always, when we get laryngitis or some sort of sore throat, there's always a point of like, oh, it can't work. This sounds dreadful, and then you start to come out of it, and you're like, oh, actually,
it works.
Should probably
really
do a couple
well.
of jobs in this zone quickly while it still sounds all bassy and raspy. And it goes with your picture. I'm looking.
You're looking at my
anyone
sexy,
listening?
raspy
Yeah, we
voice.
discussed this before we started recording, but Ava, everyone probably knows this, but it's your social media, isn't it? Isn't it all
Yes.
your main picture with the finger not in the mouth, because that makes it sound a little crazy, but it's kind of on the lips and a very...
It's my sexy, pensive, raspy voice.
Yeah, it goes great with how you sound today. So if you don't know what that picture is, just Google it and look it up. You'll know. There's a very knowing look in the eye. She has a lot going on underneath it. So anyway, it's great. So how are you otherwise? I am not hungover, by the way. I'm not too bad.
That's funny because I literally just messaged my two friends and I told them that I had this today and that I'm pretty sure Shane might be hungover, but I sound like I'm like a phone sex operator. And they responded back. My friend Lee, I think you know, LJ Shen, told me to drink a teaspoon of coconut oil. So I, grasping at straws, I did. And it was after I gagged on the phone with Parker S. Huntington, who's the other author I was telling you about. I was let on in the fact that it was one big punked moment, that it in fact was not a remedy. So I'm doing great. I got punked. I have no voice.
You downed a teaspoon or a tablespoon of fat, basically.
Teaspoon. Turns out the punk went wrong because I Googled it after the fact. Probably should have done it first. And it actually is a known cure for a raspy throat. So see, she tried to pull one over on me, but it all worked out in the end.
She doesn't even know. So here's to you, LJ Shen. Thanks for that. So we were saying that I might be hungover. That's why we did this a bit later, because I had a Christmas thing to go to. But I kept calm. I had a little bit of a heavy head this morning, but it wasn't terrible. I've kind of learned as time's gone on, as the years have gone by, from my early youth, that it doesn't pay to.
No, it never does.
No.
It sounds fun at the time, right? Like one more. But the older you get, the harder it is to recoup the next day.
Although when I first met you, I associate you with drinking.
Yes, most people do. I like a glass of champagne often, and so most people associate me with a glass of champagne. It probably doesn't help that I post every time I drink one on social media, on Instagram. And so like, I think everybody thinks I'm a lush at this point. I'm not. I only drink on the weekends, but I do, people do associate me with that.
Well, yeah, you said me and Andy came to join your table at Rare, and I think you were the only one who got us a drink, actually. No offense to anyone else. We didn't expect any. Before I sound like an ungrateful asshole. You were just like, do you want champagne? I was like, oh, yeah, why not? And then bless your husband. Off he went and came back with a glass of champagne for everyone.
He is a really great guy. It's funny. I was talking to a bunch of authors about all the things that their husbands, some husbands, stop working and they start working on their ads, and it's like, all the things. And I was like, oh no, my husband doesn't do that, but my husband buys me booze at signings, and I really think that's priceless. I think that's priceless.
I was impressed, and there was a few, I don't know if there was a few others. I think I've met a few other husbands at signings, but I'm always intrigued as to like what they think. Like, what does your fella think about the whole thing and going there and kind of, I guess, effectively being, he's Mr. Ava Harrison, right?
So, it's funny. For the first few years, I never did signings. I actually didn't even have pictures of myself up. And then one day I did. I just was like, you know what, screw it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to go in. I think it's like you too, right? You didn't have a picture of yourself for a really long time. So it's kind of like you're going to go all in. And
Yeah.
once you post that picture and you go all in, you just decide to go to signings, right? Because you're out there. And so for years,
Although Louise Bay doesn't, I will say that she goes to signings.
That is true. That is true. She's really good about not having them publicly posted.
Little Miss Incognito.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I understand what you're saying. That's what I do too.
So he came with me to my first signing, right? And so I truly believe it's, we work in this very like secluded world where it's me in my house with my computer and my dog, and I write a book, and then I send it to my editors and I send it to my narrators, and that's it, right? And so Eric only sees that when he's, at home with me. And so he went to the signing with me and he was like, wow, people read your books. And I was like, oh, interesting. So this whole time, I think he thought I was just writing and putting it out there and no one was reading it. And he thought it was amazing, right? It changed the whole way he looked at the time when I'm writing now, right? Because he now knows he's met readers. He knows they're excited about the books. So he gets excited now. So it really, he loves going. He really does. And he's so funny about it, and he's so charismatic with the readers and talks to them. So I actually love bringing him with me.
Oh yeah, no, he was great. I was like very impressed, and it was a pleasure to meet him. So you're saying that before that though, he didn't have so much. Your careers were, I guess, a bit more separated off, right? He wasn't so really involved in it or anything.
As much as I wrote books, I don't think he really understood what I was doing. I mean, he knew I wrote books, but it was very different, I don't think he realized just like how the romance readers just love the stories. And I don't think he ever understood that. And so when he came and saw them talking about the plots and the twist, and I can't believe you did this to that character, and he was like, wow, they're really invested. And I'm like, and this is why I'm invested. I don't know if I'd be as invested as if it's like almost like we work together, the readers and the writers, right? We build this world together. And he was able to see that when he came to the signing.
Yeah. And how does he, how did you were married before because you used to do something else, I know. You used to have a marketing business and stuff, right?
Yes.
Before you then went full-time authoring.
So I always wrote, right? But I never published. And so, I'd always since we were dating, even I would write these I'd literally get to 20 pages of a book and then just throw it away because it was so much work in my head. Like, what am I doing? And I didn't have a plan of action. And so I was in marketing in New York City, and then I moved to Michigan to be with him. And then I opened my own marketing company with a friend. And, I always wrote, but it was just not the same, right? Until you decide to sit down and stop and just write full time. So
it's either balls in or not, or whatever that expression is.
You know what it really is in this business, especially I'm technically a hybrid, but mainly 90% of my work is indie published. So I do everything, right? I do my marketing. I produce my own audio. You're either all in or, that's how I feel. I truly believe it's one of those all in type of businesses.
I think anything creative, or you have to reach a point. I mean, I think same with a lot of actors. It's sort of, when I came here to LA, people thought I was a bit mad, but because I'd never even been here. But I had also been working as an actor over in London, but then I had not really any contacts here, and I just sort of came and just plonked myself down, even though I actually didn't like it for the first 4 or 5 months. But I had too much pride to go back home. Um, that because of the sort of balls to the wall, all in, I was like, well, I have to make it happen. And so I think it
Yeah.
does make you more aggressive, more looking out for opportunities. You're just more invested to kind of make it, rather than just like, well, okay, yeah, I really want to do it, but you know what I mean?
I also think for me, for the first 2 books that I wrote, I didn't, other than my husband, no one knew. I had no pictures out there. I didn't tell my in-laws. I didn't tell anybody.
Mm.
And so when I finally put the picture there and I finally came out and was like, I write romance novels, and I finally told my in-laws, I felt like that was a bigger push, because now I'm like, oh, everybody knows now. So I kind of really have to work hard and like make a go of this. Like
Uh-huh.
I can't just like do it willy-nilly, I have to actually work now.
And what was people's, because I'm always intrigued, because my friends, I've said this before on podcasts, like my friends love, like I do all sorts of voiceover work, but they obsess about the romance and immediately talk about that whenever anyone new comes into the group, or whatever, we're introduced to people, or we're out at a party. So I'm always intrigued, like how, like family members, and then your now husband, at the time you were dating, he knew that you were writing romance, or were you just writing all sorts of genres?
When I first started when I first was writing in front of him, so when I was younger, I wrote more, I like a chick lit, like kind of
Mm.
funny, because I'm kind of sarcastic, so it kind of works for
Say
me.
what?
Right?
I never
It's
picked
just
up on
I have
that,
that
Ava.
dry sense of humor.
Mm.
And then that didn't bode well, because I wrote this like fake memoir about a party girl in New York City, and my mom read it, and she shouldn't have read it, okay? And she got really mad because it was written in first person present tense as if it was real. And it sounded so real that she was like, you're done. I'm taking your credit cards away from you. She thought that I was doing everything in the book. And so I stopped writing for a while. And then I tried to write some thrillers, because I love psychological thrillers. And I'm still writing one now. So, I mean, that might be happening in the future. But it wasn't until, I know this is so typical, it wasn't until 50 Shades of Grey, right, came out, and I
Yeah.
watched the indie market explode, that I actually sat down to write a a romance type book. And I had always read romance, I just never really thought about the market and it being there. And so after that, I started, but it's interesting how people handle it when you tell them you write romance novels.
Yeah.
So, you have different people who say different things. I had one friend of mine from my kid's school who had thought that I was standoffish, because, I was so in my own head writing these stories that I wasn't really talking that much when I would go to the school to pick up the kids. And finally, I told her I wrote romance novels, and I gave her a book, and she read it in one day, which I thought was pretty cool. And it was called Illicit, and it was a forbidden romance between a student and a teacher. I mean, they were legal. She was 19. She was held back. He was right out of college, so he was 23. But she came up to me in the school hallway and she goes, I gotta be honest, I liked you before, but you are a lot cooler now. And I was like, what? And she's like, I always thought you were like, just maybe a little prude, but oh, you're not. So that's one way that it works. Then
Yeah.
there's the other side, right? So like when I told my in-laws, they were super cool about it. They were like, very like, they went and looked me up. They were very impressed, right?
Mm.
They couldn't believe I had written that many books and hadn't mentioned it. They were very proud of me, and they still are. My parents were very proud of me as well. So that was fine. My sister is my biggest supporter and reads all my books, and so is my mother. But then you have other people, right? And so, you go to these events and people, word around town is, oh, she writes romance novels, and then they come up to you and they make comments that are
Mm.
not always the greatest. They're, some of them are kind of condescending, like, why romance? Why wouldn't you write something else? And, and
Right,
so you
something
just kind of
more
like,
worthwhile or more literary.
yes. And, I have people say, like, do people actually read your books? And I'm like, oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
they
yeah.
do. And you try to, just keep a smile, because that this is, and sometimes I, come back with the statistics of how many people read romance. It's like $1 billion industry.
Mm.
Right. And obviously, and then other times, if I've had a couple glasses of champagne, I might come out snarkier.
Oh, it's the weekend.
Right. I try to always be, lovely and respond nicely.
No, sometimes you've got to just give a little bit of a slap back.
I remember one time saying something that I probably shouldn't have. I had had 3 glasses of champagne by that moment, and I, did say, yes, people buy my book, and then said, right. But, wasn't my prouder moment. But, sometimes it's hard. You hope that people support you. At the
Yeah.
same time, a lot don't. I mean, there's a stigma there. I mean, I love romance. I love the whole idea of it, and I love writing it, and I love reading it. So I'm not going to pretend that I don't. So,
Uh-huh.
I just, how
I
it is.
think,
I'm sure
yeah,
you
I
get the
think,
same thing with you.
uh, I mean, like I said, my friends just fucking love it. They've tried to put it on the Bluetooth speaker at parties, and I've like nearly murdered them. Like they've found samples on Audible, and they're like, suddenly my voice comes on saying something about, her beautiful green eye, and I'm like, what you assholes. As much as I love my own work, I don't want it played through a Bluetooth speaker at a party.
I
Uh,
can't even imagine.
but that's them. They're assholes. And then, but yeah, no, I've had that. I found that not so much with the romance, but yeah, just in general, as it was more when I was an actor. Uh, certain ones used to drive me mad, and it used to be more in LA because, I mean, obviously the place is full of them. But you say you're an actor, and you would kind of get like that, oh, okay, kind of vibe. But I would have people ask me, and this actually did happen in England too. Uh, oh, you're an actor, okay. Um, can you make a living doing that? And I was like,
Oh, God.
yeah, they were like, some guy I think once at a party asked me if I could make enough money to live off of, or if I could pay the rent or something like that. It was a really intimate like question to me, like, oh, so
That's
do you have
like
enough
going up
money?
to going up to someone in an office job and being like, are you being paid minimum wage? Like, who
Mm.
says that?
I was just floored, and I've noticed it, and I think personally I found it was always more people who have the less idea they have of what you do or what's possible, I would say. So for my instance, it's sort of people think actors, well, either I don't see you on television, then I don't know, then you have to eat at the soup kitchen, right? There's or you wait tables all the time, like you don't ever act. So there's people didn't have any concept of like all of that. It changed when I said I did voiceover, I will say. Like when I did voiceover, people they seem now to always be able to go, oh, okay, cool. Oh, that's a great, yeah.
No, what they're really doing is Googling you under the table, and they're like, oh, wow, he has 400
Yes,
titles.
who knows? Who knows? But
Which
yeah, I think the same with romance. I think people, for you, it's like if they don't have a concept of it as well, they
well,
just,
the first question they always ask is, who are you published by?
oh, God,
Right
okay.
there. And you're just, oh, right? Like,
Yeah,
who am I
okay.
published by? So then, I have one pen name that was published with Harlequin. So I respond with that one, which,
Hmm.
of course they think bodice rippers. And then I'm published with Amazon Publishing. And then I'm indie published. And they're like, well, why wouldn't you? And then, you come back with, sometimes you just smile, and sometimes you come back with the statistics,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So it's hard.
It's interesting, but I do think yeah, there seems to be a lot more information out there and a lot more understanding of the genre. I was just interested with your husband as well, like when you got further into it, you know, in like how does it affect the relationship, or is there any sort of conversation about, because it's romance, right? Or like any writing, as it, but especially
So
romance, like has an
he
intimacy to it.
So he will, anywhere we go, everybody pats him on his back, and they're like, "Oh, you're married to a romance writer. You must inspire a lot." And I'm like, secretly rolling my eyes, right?
Mhm.
And my husband always plays it up like, yes, everything's based on me. And I'm like, oh God, like, oh, really? Um, but it does it, it affects our lives in different ways, right? When I'm on deadline, I'm not necessarily easy, right, to be
Mm.
around.
Right.
You're stressed out.
Stress.
I try really hard. I have children, so I try really hard to only write and work from 9 o'clock in the morning till 3 o'clock, you know, in the afternoon, and I try not to work on the weekends. But as you know, with social media in general, writing or being a presence on social media is full time. So sometimes it will affect us. I try really hard to have it not affect our relationship, but he's really supportive,
Mm.
and he likes to talk about plots because he's really into movies. So he sees everything like a movie. So he wants to talk about plot twists. And sometimes his plot twists are ridiculous and sometimes they're fantastic. And sometimes I'm like, I will be the most hated author in the world if I do what you just said. But thank you. Step back.
But you are known for trying things that people say don't do that, like you'll alienate
Yes. So
people or whatever.
I am 100% known for doing things that are not the norm
Mm.
in romance necessarily, and trying to, most of the times you think of romance and it's happily ever after, it's funny, it's sweet. I tend to write romance that is perfectly imperfect, right? It's, everybody's flawed and there's always an issue, and you tend
Mhm.
to need tissues when you read my books. You laugh too because I am very dry and sarcastic at the same
Mhm.
time, right? But it definitely, things that happen in my books don't necessarily always happen, but I like to write true life, real life. And I hope that the people, like the book that we did together, one of them, Intention, for example,
Yeah.
deals with very serious female issues. And I don't think that's really often talked about, but it didn't mean that she couldn't have her happily ever after, right?
Yeah.
It just meant that the road was a little bumpy.
But do you think, well, because the road's always bumpy, but not in the like yours, I'll ask you because you can explain it better. Like, do yours go down a sort of a more darker, realistic path in a way? Because there's always
Yes.
bumps and conflicts in romance. There's always like, oh, and she's run off because like she got the wrong end of the stick and she thinks that he's this and he's not, or he didn't tell her this and he got divorced years ago, but he thought she'd leave if he told. There's always like something like that, right?
Yeah, mine are more serious.
Yeah, I'd
Mine
say
are
yours
a
have
little
more.
darker, right?
Yes.
Um, they're usually, a lot of the times in romance you have that like story arc, which is the couple together, and mine are more character arcs of the characters finding peace within themselves, or loving their own
Mm.
flaws or whatever it is. And it tends to lead to more of a realistic dark approach. That's not to say, I mean, people loved Intention because Nathaniel was so witty and funny and sarcastic and they laughed, but that's not to say that there wasn't real deep, heart-wrenching issues in it. So I just try to convey them in a way that would be readable, so it's not just so depressing, right? But
Yeah.
I always want something to be like learned from my stories, if that makes sense.
Uh-huh. Right.
And yeah, so it's a little bit different. I also will always write a book in like first person present tense so far. I mean, I might do past tense, but it's always first person. And I write it in a way that most of the time my readers will say they felt that they were struggling the same struggle with
Mhm.
the character. Like they felt, that they identified with that character because of the struggle.
Right, which is sort of part of that's your in no pun intended intention of
Yes.
your I'm not good enough to come up with that. That was pure by accident. Yeah, that is your desire, right? That people go along
Yes.
that journey. I feel like that with any
It's
writer.
hard though. I want you to know it's hard because I feel like with plotting, I'm always like I have to like recreate the wheel. Like I'm like, oh my God, now what do I do?
Mm.
And so I'll sit on the phone with my one friend, Livia, who helps me plot books. And I'm like, oh, I already did that. And I already did that. Like, what am I trying to fix? What am I trying to heal? What am I trying to do? And she's like, sometimes I feel like you're just like these are all the issues you have, and you're like trying to like write books about it. I'm starting to feel that too, and it's kind of making me feel neurotic, right? Like, do I have any more issues? Can I touch upon any more of this crazy I have inside my brain?
Well, didn't you
And
get?
so
Oh, go on.
what? I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, didn't you get? I don't know if you told me at the Sovas that you got a bit of pushback from viewers on listeners, sorry, on the deceit, wasn't it, with the lying?
I did. I did.
I
I
hadn't had too
did.
many champagnes at that point. I
Yeah,
remember.
no, we had drank too much at that point. I was like, oh, deceit. So deceit is I point blank tell you right then and there, it's called deceit. Okay.
Mm,
The last sentence of the blurb is, he is a liar. Okay. The first sentence of the book basically tells you he's going to lie. And you get through the whole book and he lies.
mhm,
Spoiler alert, he lies. And then whatever happens, she does something that is not necessarily typical in romance. She breaks up with him and moves on with her life. And without saying spoilers, right?
mhm,
And I got a lot of pushback because she wasn't supposed to do that.
mm.
And but for me, it's real life, right? So real life is, a guy lies to you, you break up with them. That's real life. If you choose
Uh-huh.
to forgive them in the future, that's fine. That's your prerogative. But I don't write, I write stories that I think will happen in real life. So even
Yes.
if they're a little bit over the top because they're all billionaires. Other than that,
Yeah.
other than the billionaire
Romance
thing,
has the most billionaires per capita
I mean, it's
anywhere.
crazy. And it's really hard to come up with new ideas for billionaires because I'm like, hotel mogul, done it.
Yeah.
Tycoon, done it. Hedge fund billionaire, done it. Oh, what other job is there?
Yeah, that was going to be one of my questions as well, is how do you feel that there's a finite number of ideas uh, that you have, or do you just think that you will just somehow they'll always kind of something's going to come, and it always does?
So I have a lot of ideas, but they're not all romance, right? So
Mm.
that's like the slippery slope of like, do I write into another genre? Well, not necessarily, or maybe I will, because ideas are always coming. They're everywhere. You don't even realize anything you say to me. Like when we were messaging before this, we made a joke about something, and you were like, the next book idea, and I'm like, really? No, actually, it really is the next book idea. Thank you. Right? So it's
You're welcome.
everywhere. There's nothing there's nothing sacred when people talk to you. You're in your head cataloging it as something you could write down the future. Sorry, it's true. To every friend of mine who gets drunk at dinner, like, I might happen to put that in a book. It's
Yeah.
just the nature of the beast, right? It's not that I'm going to take the idea, it's that you've inspired me to write something. And
Right.
so I don't necessarily usually right now I just finished a book and I'm writing a new book as we speak. And I'm thinking 2 books down the line, and I already have that in my head, but then I was thinking to myself, well, what next? What do I
Mhm.
do next? And the only thing I can tell myself is that I think this is I'm about to release my 12th book, right? I think it's 12. It might be 11. I should probably count that on my fingers.
We'll just give you 12. We'll say 12. It's a nice
You
round number.
Right? So, and I think to myself, I've done it every other time. I've come up with an idea, and the ideas come from, you have no idea. They come from the bartender who stood in front of my husband and I, and we were at drinks, and his name was Pierce, and I looked at him and I cocked my head and I said, "Pierce, I'm writing a book about Pierce Lancaster. Thank you." And my husband was like, "What?" And I'm like, "That's it. I just came up with the third brother. It's no longer 2 brothers, it's 3." And the whole story came to me just looking at a bartender giving me a glass of champagne. So
Right.
you don't know, they just come, but it's hard. It is hard in certain aspects because you don't want to write the same story over and over again.
Yeah.
Need a
That's kind of my
material.
question with romance as well, because it's you wonder. I wonder. I'm like, how many formulas are there, or how many stories are there? And so,
And I think it's not very hard for me because I don't want the same, I make it I have such specific story ideas that are mine and that I write about that are
mm,
dark and emotional. Like, I can't do them again. You know what I
yeah,
mean? Like, you can't do The Widower again, or
Yeah.
can you? Right?
Oh.
Like, I don't know, like, and how many years down the line could I go back to The Widower? Like, is there like a rule of thumb? What do readers think? I try not to let that affect me, but at the same time, I'm like, I've done I think 2 office romances. Can I go back there? Because I love office romances. I think they're fabulous, right? So,
Uh-huh.
like, at what point can you come back? As long as the, actual story is different, is that enough?
Yeah, I guess like with any creative job, there's always that eternal sort of questioning of oneself, or when will the what will the next idea be? When will it come? It sounds to me though that it's much a process of, you may have moments of sort of, oh, well, where would I go after like the next book or two or whatever? But then even if you have moments of like questioning maybe, or like, who knows, something always comes into from the ether, something always sort of pops up, and
Yeah,
the
luckily
train keeps rolling.
I've been lucky enough, right, that somebody has said something to spark an idea,
Ah.
right? I'm lucky enough that so far, knock on wood, that has happened, right? I don't know what I'll do when it comes. I mean, for all you know, in like 2 years, I'll be like, "Hey, Shane, remember how I said this? I'm wrong. I just bought a book on tropes. I have no idea what to write about."
I doubt it, but okay, well, we'll table that. Who knows? That's I doubt that will be the case though. But I also wanted to ask you then, on the subject of writing and imagination and stuff, because you told me on text, you were like, ask me anything. You're an open book. How? Because I've never asked an author this. How do you go about writing like the sex scenes? Uh,
Oh, geez.
yeah,
I gotta be honest.
you said it. You opened that box. Because
So,
some people don't write such, there's what's it? There's a pendulum of intensity, I think, or whatever.
well, I
Like,
will tell you, I don't think people realize this, but I'm very, very careful with how I write my sex scenes.
mm,
I they're they're not 2 pages long, right? They're maybe 1 page. I have a certain word count that I try to keep it under.
mm,
That's because my mother reads my books. I actually, I like to say that I don't actually use specific words in my books. I
uh-huh.
have used 1 or 2 just because I've had audio listeners be like, "You have to make Shane East say whatever the word is." And I'm like, "Okay, guys, I'm gonna throw in 1 C word just to hear Shane say it."
Oh, you
And
filthy
so,
buggers on Twitter.
or like, and I'm not even kidding. In the last book I wrote, there was no words that were overly graphic. Now,
Mm,
of course, there was sex, and of course, it was 500 words of it, but it was done in a way that wasn't overly graphic. But
yeah.
it's very sensual. I like to say my sex scenes are very sensual. They're not graphic; they're sensual.
But do
So
you?
there's a lot of, and it's very embarrassing to write them, to be honest with you.
Oh, it is, even though it's just you in your office.
So the first person who will read, it's actually hysterical. When you read my first draft, the first draft, a lot of the times it will actually say in my first draft, insert sex here.
Interesting.
Because the thing is I dictate a lot, right?
Uh-huh.
And so I will, I spend a lot of the time as a mom, like in my car and whatnot. So I'm totally, I don't know if you remember the movie Troop Beverly Hills. I am that author with with dictating on my phone while
Mhm.
waiting for my child, right? And yeah, it's it's so,
I just love the idea of you dictating a sex scene out, waiting for your kids to pick them up for
yeah, it's
outside the door.
horrible. So a lot of the times if I'm like, writing on the phone, or if I'm, dictating, or if even when I'm writing with my kids in the room, because if I'm, somehow, behind schedule and I have to write at home, I won't write those scenes with them around, because that's like, I'm blushing.
Yeah.
And so I'll write insert sex scene here. And then eventually I have to go back, and it is like, it's very technical to write a sex scene. I don't think people realize that. You
That's
have to
my
make sure it all
question.
works, right? You have to make sure it all works. And you're like, trying to figure out like,
Would
okay,
that
so does
fit
this
in
work?
there? No, I'm
Yeah, I
joking.
don't know. So it's kind of like awkward. So I usually will do that. I'll never forget though, I was writing one book. And my friend Lee, who's just, she beta reads all my books. She got one of the insert sex scenes here. And so she sends me a message and she's like, well, it's like the final countdown. When are you planning to insert the sex scene? And I'm like, I can't do it. And she's like, this is what I want. When I'm reading your book right now, this is what I want. And she kind of like said to me like the type of scene that she wanted. And I was like, okay. And so I went out to dinner. It was a Friday night with my husband and we're sitting at the bar, like at the bar, like lounge, and I'm drinking champagne, surprise, surprise. And all of a sudden it hit me. It hit me, the whole entire scene. And I looked up from the glass and I said, I'm going to write on my phone right now and you can't say anything and I'm so sorry and this is awful, but it hit me. And he's like, what? I'm like, I'll talk to you about it later. And so I wrote the whole entire scene on my phone in the notepad while he was drinking, like twiddling his thumbs, right? It took me maybe 5 minutes. I sent it to Lee and she's like, yes, this is what I wanted. And it was such a great scene. And maybe it was the alcohol. Maybe it was, the fact that I was out with my husband with no kids. And so I didn't feel the pressure of like little eyes looking at me. But it was a great scene. It was a great scene.
So it's not a case of, because I was wondering that once or twice. I thought, do they have to sit down and sort of plot like the course of how it's gonna run? This sex scene. Like, what do they want to get out of it? Like you said, yours you like the sensuality of it rather than just kind of hardcore whatever. But I was intrigued as to like, is there a formula or is it more like that?
Well, it's
the
the moment
at a bar and you've just boom, inspiration.
Well, but I have to know. So I'm a plotter, right? So there are people who are plotters and there are people who are pantsers, and I need to know
What did you
exactly.
say? Pantsers.
Yeah. So they just fly with, like they just go into the book without knowing what they're going to write, and they just write the whole book.
How do you spell that?
Like that. What?
How do you spell that? Pantsers?
I don't know.
Oh, okay. It's like oh, okay. Because I like these podcasts to be educational as well, and often I didn't even know what PNR was for a long time, even though I was doing it.
PANSTER? No, Pantser. PANSER. I don't know.
Pantser.
Someone else.
Okay. It sounds like a German.
Phone friend. Phone an author.
I just never heard that before, so I wonder what that was.
And so yeah, that's exactly. I'm about to phone an author. I'm going to be like, how do you spell pantser? Right.
Well, just people know you have plotters and you have pantsers, and that's something I didn't know before today. So I'm taking that away from this. This is great. And you are a plotter. So go on. Along those lines.
So, for me, I need to know what I call it the WTF moment, like the what the fuck moment that happens at the 70% mark. So I need to know what the big reveal is. I need to know what the 50% mark is, the 25% mark. I need to know what's going to happen, what the motivation is. I need a short sentence for each chapter I'm going to write before I can sit down and write it. So when I go into the sex scene, I know why I'm doing it. I know why they're doing it. I know what we've led up to. I'm not just sitting there going, and now they should have sex, right? Like it's thought out. I know what the motivation is. Like this is like an intention. We're going to go back to that because you were there with me, reading it. I knew that they had this like sexual chemistry that was like building, and they hated each other, and he was basically blackmailing her at that point. And I knew that it was building. And so what does that lead to? That leads to, angry, like hate you sex.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's what you would get. So, it was pretty easy to write that scene. Right. Because I knew exactly where I was going with it. So I was able to sit down. And I mean, there was the difficulties of being like, think British. You have to say it in a British accent. Everything has to be British. And seeing as I'm not, right, that I had to think about. But I actually have really good beta readers who are British and help me. So I send that to them and I'm like, is this enough?
Right. Yeah. Is this what? Because British people more...
No, but
reserved
how you would talk dirty would be different than an American.
Yeah, I guess I don't.
I just want to time out and say phone a friend, phone an author. It's Pantser.
Pantser.
Pantser. Pantser.
Pantser. Is that an actual word, or is that like an author word that you guys?
I think it's an author word, but I just phoned a friend.
Oh, okay, that's good to know. Yeah, there's a meme that goes around that's like something about British people having sex, and it's sort of, oh, thank you, that was quite nice, goodbye. Like, I don't know, there was just like something, I was like, oh, fuck off. I think
You
my
know what?
arsehole
I
friend sent it
think
to
it's
me.
like, I think that, I don't, there's no difference between a British person and an American. But
Well, some
maybe,
people are talkers and some people aren't, I think, like full stop, isn't it?
so I think that maybe it's just maybe the word you would say, during
Yes,
it. Maybe, like,
probably.
I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
maybe,
yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, I
Is that
think.
weird? I'm
Uh,
blushing now. I'm like, oh, that's
you
awkward.
said, let's talk about anything. Uh, I would say, I'm not going to go too personal, but yeah, I would say my experience in America is that there's more there's more talking than I would say.
Americans like to talk when they have sex, and British people don't.
I
There.
think Americans like to talk in general.
Yes, I agree. I studied abroad in London
Oh
for
yeah, of course you did. So yeah, there you go.
yeah, so 4 months. So I will tell you that there are Americans who like to talk. We
Mm.
like to talk, and it's a different energy level.
Yeah, and that transfers over into the boudoir, I'm sure, more than it does with British people. Which isn't to say, though, that I don't think British people are sort of, because my friends take the piss. Like, oh, yeah. So, anyway, so good. It's good to know that you're a plotter, but also that you write sex scenes at bar, at
At a
bars
bar.
when the inspiration hits you. I've just always been curious. I'll probably ask other authors how they do it. So, that fascinates me. Now, moving on from that, we said about, talking about intention now, and this is no disrespect to anyone else in the category, but Ava and I and Andy were robbed at the Sovas Awards.
Robbed.
We were robbed.
Robbed.
We were. And Xe Sands, who was the narrator who won in that category with her book, which I don't know that book. It was a historical romance, I think, is wonderful and amazing. I've listened to her plenty of times. She's
You know
incredible.
what? That's what I heard. I heard she's wonderful. I heard she's
She is
amazing.
phenomenal.
But as the politically correct thing we have to say, we're so happy to be nominated. Honor.
We were very happy to be nominated. Would like to win. I was just intrigued what you thought of that category anyway, because the one that won was, I found this odd for myself. The one that won that Xe narrated fantastically was the I don't know the name of it, but it was very much a historical romance. I think that was very chaste, and it was that was her words in the acceptance speech for anyone who wasn't there. It was that there was literally about like no more than a
Kiss.
kiss
There
kind
was a
of
kiss.
thing. Yeah. So, but this category was romance and erotica.
Yeah, I thought that I actually found that fascinating as well because she did say that it was, and then I know that it was a kiss, and I think that maybe it would be more beneficial to have more categories because I feel like we are all lumped into one.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's
Like
kind
an
of does
actual
like
historical romance only
yeah,
section.
I mean there was categories, 72 of them.
There were a lot of categories,
There
ladies and
were, and there
gentlemen
were a
listening.
lot of deviations on those categories, right?
Mm,
But it was just romance and erotica. And you know what? I thought that it was a wonderful event, and I was so happy to go, and I was so happy to be with you and Andy. And
yeah. I mean, we had a piss up. It was really fun.
it was wonderful, and I would never, I really, really, I was so happy that I decided to go, regardless of winning or losing. Right? It was amazing
Yeah.
just to have the book nominated because, it just shows how wonderful you guys. I mean, I was telling everybody just how amazing you guys were with conveying the emotions that I had written, and that book means so much to me. The story of
Yeah.
intention just means so much to me that it was amazing for that to be the one that was, um nominated,
Hmm.
but I did find it to be kind of like there should have been maybe like a difference, like, a difference between like, I don't want to say I feel like that's more of contemporary fiction, women's fiction
Hmm.
versus romance, right? And a women's fiction book maybe should have their own category maybe in the future. I don't know. I'd have to listen or like
Yeah.
read the book to know what the cat if it was really. I just know from what she had said that it was very tame.
Yes.
So I thought it was odd to put a tame book with an erotic novel because I know in the past some of the books have been very erotic that have been nominated.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm
And it
not sure.
made me.
Maybe it just needs to be like, there's so many different categories within romance to begin with, right? Maybe I wouldn't have actually put personally, I wouldn't have done romance and erotica together.
No.
Erotica is different than romance, erotic novels, right? They're different. So I would think that if they were going to expand on that award, I would do maybe women's fiction, women's fiction alone, romance alone, and erotica alone.
Yes. Which
Because there's
is.
so many talented narrators and so many wonderful books. But I don't think that, necessarily my books would be classified correctly with a book that's more erotic, because I think that the listeners and readers are going to be so sorely upset. Sorry, there's a
Oh.
FaceTime coming in and it's ringing.
Go away. I don't know who you are. Is it all right?
You know what I mean? Like, I think that that is a situation where I feel like sometimes when they're nominated together, it's kind of like we're all the same, but we're not.
No. And I think because I don't know if it's maybe sort of a product also of the explosion of indie publishing and the romance genre as a whole, that it doesn't. Yeah, I took that away from that award ceremony where I was like, I don't think it doesn't fit to put all of those, or to put that type of book together with what we had, or some other people had in that category. And I agree, however you want to label it, to my mind, because I maybe don't know the all the other genres, like you say, women's fiction. To me, I don't really know what that means so much. But as far as romance goes, I always think of historical romance is really quite different, although it can be quite saucy. But historical romance, contemporary romance covers what we do, um, to my mind. And then
Yes.
erotica is kind of, way more into.
Well, it's all about the story. It's all about what the story arc is, right? And like what is the motivation of the story? And it's, how they get to know each other as characters
Yeah,
and fall in love, right? Is it through sex or is it through, and I think that that's also narrated differently, right? I think that, these listen, I love working with narrators and I love thinking about who the narrators are before I write my book specifically. They're such talented people and they should have their own categories for what their specialty is, not be lumped together necessarily, right?
right. Yeah. And everyone's good except Joe Arden.
Right? I
So.
know. Actually, I've actually have him in one of my audios, and he is wonderful. But I do
Oh,
love it's
yeah.
such a
I always give him
having
shit. I always give him a hard time. We do actually like each other, but on
You
Twitter
know what?
we.
I love going on Twitter and reading. I think you even recently posted one where you congratulated him, and you're like,
Yeah, I can't remember. I said no. I said working on, because we got best cast or something, like one of the top 5 like best
instant
cast.
gratification, right?
The
By Lauren
instant grat,
Phillips.
yeah, with
Yeah.
for Lauren, and then he was on that, and I said that's wonderful. Except my experience of having to work with him, and then he wrote, "Thanks, buddy, blah, blah, we're friends now." And then I memed back like, "Yeah, we're best friends, right?" Yeah, and he said, "I think so." So no, we're great. I have a great time with him. I like this sort of giving him shit and vice versa thing.
I
So
actually think it's wonderful, and I think that the listeners, like, it just shows some of your personality, right? So right now, as a listener of the books you narrate, I just know the personality of the characters that you portray. But to see you guys bantering on Twitter, it's the same way that the reason that we banter on Facebook or Twitter or whatever it
yeah,
is with authors, right? We want the readers to see who we really are and the way that we are. And I think it's just such the banter that you and Joe have it's just classic. It's awesome.
I think no, that's what I like about romance as well. It's sort of, I think I've said that before elsewhere, is that yeah, there's a freedom to just have a laugh, and people are looking for your personality behind the work or the so-called sexy voice or the whatever it is that you do, or the sexy writing. And people love kind of latching onto that and getting a feel for you beyond that, which is really nice in romance. And it's no holds barred in that sort of genre.
Yeah.
You don't have to be too PC. I don't have to be, too actory, which I'm not necessarily, but it's just a different professional image sometimes. And in romance, you can just kind of be a bit more loose and
Yeah, you
fun.
100%. It's fun, you know?
Yeah,
It's
I love that as a narrator. That's what's kind of made me go further into it. But I have a couple more questions before we go, because I think we're nearing an hour. Can't take up any more of your time. But I listened to your other podcast with Vanessa Fewings
yeah,
that you've done that's out there, which is it's a good one for authors who are interested in Kindle Unlimited.
yes.
Correct? Yes. So you can Google that if you are, maybe an indie author or just interested in that. But taking away from that, I listened to you and I was like, oh, and I think I thought this anyway. I was like, she's very business savvy.
Thank you.
Well, also because you had a marketing company, I was like, oh, okay. And it's the same with Lauren Blakely. When I talked to her, I was like, oh, she's very up on just the business side of it, not just the being, an artist and creating stuff. And I know as an actor that it kind of cuts both ways, because some actors are very business savvy and some aren't. I mean, some of my friends are wonderful actors and just seem like clueless on a lot of other things, but to do with that, like promotion and business and everything. But I'm wondering, from your point of view, since you now have this great success, it's sort of, what do you put most? Is the being business savvy more equal or slightly less than the actual sort of creativity and the natural writing talent?
The business part is such a large
Mm,
component, honestly. Um, Writing the book in the grand scheme of things is just like a tiny piece of the puzzle, right?
yeah.
And listen, creativity wise, like, I bleed my soul. I mean, you've read my books. I
Mm,
bleed into my books, right? I put every single emotion I can possibly convey into my books. But I spend more time marketing my books. I spend more time on the business side than I do writing.
mm-hmm.
It's, because there's just, the market constantly changes. Everything is changing. I mean, when I first started, audio was just a blip, right? It was just getting its legs. And now I consider audio to be one of the biggest components when I'm writing my books. I'm always thinking now, and it's been this way for the last, I'd say for 1 year, for the last like 4 novels I've written, I write them with the idea that they're being made into audio. So I change the way I wrote them
Right.
to
Because
make
of
that
audio.
because of audio. I changed the way I write books. I changed the way I plot books. I changed the way I edit my books. I changed everything because of audio. And that's just another thing, being ahead of the curve and seeing what audio is becoming and knowing it's just going to keep growing,
Uh,
It's just going to get larger and larger, which is exciting for you guys, right? But it did change everything. I mean, I write books and, I just wrote a book. It's coming out in a month, right? And I had to write that book months ahead of time, not because of anything other than narration. That was it. I wrote that book and finished that book and sent it to the narrators in November 1st, right? But
right.
it's not coming out till mid-January, months
Yes.
later, because that is such a large component. So I think the business side is being able to see what's next. And, in the end of the day, as an indie author, everything falls on us, right? We have to market, we have to sell it, we have to produce it, we have to find editors. And I have a very great team with me, that I use, but
Mm,
that's the full-time job, right? I mean, for me, writing is not as much of a full-time job because I write 3 books a year. I write them, I write a few thousand words a day, Monday through Friday, it's
uh-huh.
the other component that is such a large component of being an author because I have to do it myself.
Right. So it is almost like you have to, it's kind of like acting. It's sort of, you can have that natural talent and come up with some great stories, but if you don't have the sort of the savvy and the wherewithal to, get
Well,
in line with what's happening,
100%.
what's moving.
100%. There's so many times I read a book and I'm like, this is the best book I've read in months. Why didn't it do better? Why didn't
Mm.
it? And then you look at the cover and you look at the this and you look at that, and you're like, why didn't I even know? I just stumbled upon this book. Is it on audio? And you look at it, and it's so. In the end of the day, listen. If you want to make it a career, it's a career. It's full time.
Yeah.
I mean, it's fine to write a book and do it as a hobby. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I did it for years. For years, I was writing as a hobby. But when I made the decision to come out as Ava, right,
Mhm.
and show my face and tell people I did this and make it a full-time career, I had to change everything, right? I had to
Mhm.
always look for trends and, see what was new and out there and how I could find a new audience and grow.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's that's what I have learned from working with you guys anyway, just how, successful people are very indie authors especially are very on it. And also because I've heard sort of stories from authors of how publishers have taken something and done nothing with it, and it's just sort of
Yes.
gone flat
And I
because
think
no
that's
promotion,
the hard
nothing.
part. That's the hard part, right? Is listen, I of course would love to, do everything, right? I'd like to sell traditional, I'd like to do indie, I'd like to do a lot of things. But as an indie author, I have full control. And
Mhm.
so what makes a book successful, it falls on my shoulders, right?
Yeah.
And so it makes it a full time.
Well,
it's
yeah,
it's
and
a
then
lot of
so you have to be able to pick up the baton and do that side of the business. Otherwise, you have this great book, great story, but if it's not marketed right, if the cover's not right, if it doesn't get out there in the right way, who the fuck's gonna be able to listen to it or read it, unless by chance?
And it's so disheartening when you don't do it right? Because
Mm.
again, I can't speak for everybody, but all I can tell you is the authors I know, and I know so many wonderful indie authors and so many wonderful traditional authors. We do bleed our souls into these books, right?
Mm.
And for us to find out that something's not done correctly by somebody or whatever, or if you don't do it correctly for yourself, and
Yes.
not to have the readers read it, right? It's so disheartening because you know what you put into that book.
Hmm. Yeah. No, very true. And I've read some good ones that people have wanted to try and publish, but then uh, they've just not ended up doing it, or they've kind of maybe chickened out of doing the audio. But it's probably been a good thing because they've also not. I've realized later down the line, I was like, they didn't have the setup or the idea like to market it and stuff, and it's going to be a big expense. And it's just sort of, it's a
It's
good
true.
book, it will just disappear.
100%. Like my first book that I published, I went about the whole ACX loading it. I
Mm.
actually met the narrator who I was supposed to work with at the Sovas, and I didn't produce it. I didn't. Why didn't I not produce it? Well, because of many reasons. At the time, it was my first book. The financial, like it is expensive, right, to produce your
Yeah.
own books, and I just didn't have the infrastructure, right,
Mm.
to do what it needed to do. So I didn't do it at the time. And it
Yeah.
took me a while to understand how to do it properly and to know that it is such a large component and to not, you know, I hate to say it, like screw it up, right? You
Yeah.
don't
Yeah. Yeah.
so I mean a lot of people necessarily, don't know how to do it properly, but there's so many great resources now. Oh my God.
Mm.
When I started, they didn't have all these great groups on Facebook. There's wonderful groups on Facebook that can really help,
Yeah,
even
that is
just
a
asking for
huge.
narrators, like oral fixation, like, you have a question about narrators, they'll go in and they'll jump in, they'll ask you ages, what the voice sounds like, what the state is. They'll come up with a whole list of narrators for you.
Oh, I know. I have some people on Twitter who have. I don't know if it's her name's, if it's Susie or if it's one of the other ones. There's a few who are very prolific on Twitter, and you guys are great if you're listening. You're lovely. And one of them, she's probably going to tweet when she hears this. Has like a barcoding system for what she's listened to, who's doing
Wow.
what, or something. Like there's a whole system. So if it is you, Susie, or if it's someone else, then just tweet and tag us
Probably
when you
it's
hear
probably
this.
and they also have a group for you in Facebook now. You know that, right?
I heard it. It only just started. There was about 8 people in it but I was told it was small but growing and mighty.
I know somebody invited me into it, and I was like, I have been sick, obviously, so I saw the notification like you've been invited to join this group, and I was like on my deathbed dying, right? And so I didn't join it, but then I was looking at it and I was like, this is so funny. I'm like, I have to ask Shane if he knows that he has a group dedicated to loving his work.
It's very flattering, and I didn't know until something was going on, and then Viviana was in the Twitter thing as well, and then I was like, what are you talking about? And then what are you talking about? And then I was told, oh, there's a group for you, and then a link, and I was like, oh. It's like, wow. But very flattering, very nice of people. And now to finish up, what's on the horizon, so people know?
I am excited to release, Conceal is, I have a new book coming out in January 19th.
And you love a one-word title.
I do. I just want you to know, and I'll be calling you soon to talk about book 3 in the next series that I want you to narrate, obviously, because I'm thinking ahead. I'm actually doing a 2-word title next. I'm actually going to deviate and like branch into a whole new world with 2 words. But yeah, so
let me just pick myself up off the floor. Hold on.
I know. It's crazy. I'm really shaking things up. But Conceal is, so we had talked about Deceit. Deceit is Addison Price, and then Entice, which was narrated by Virginia Rose and Sebastian York, was Entice, and that was the brother. And then Conceal is the youngest brother. All of the books are written as standalones. There's no spoilers. There's nothing to tell you the plot of another book. You can read them in any order. But Conceal is the youngest brother, and it's narrated by Zachary Weber and Andy Art. And I am so excited because I listened to it, and it is fantastic. And that was one of the reasons that I wrote the book so early, because of scheduling. Yes. I needed to get it to Andy and Zach like a million years ago, I swear.
Busy people.
Right? Yeah, really. And, but they're so worth it. And so, that releases simultaneously. So the audio will go live with the ebook within a few days, and the paperback.
Right.
And then I'm writing another book, and I already hired my narrators, who I can't say because it's a surprise, but it's fantastic. I probably told you at the Sovas while I was there, because one of the female narrator was actually there with us. And I was like, I know we totally did talk about it, because I told her her voice sounded like springtime. And you made fun of me.
A light banter, I like to call it.
You asked me what springtime sounds like, and I pointed to her.
I'm such an asshole.
You really are. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Just finishing that book, so that I can get it to them and edited in time. And
so when the one with Andy and Zach is, you said it's Conceal, and that comes out in
January 19th. Yeah.
January 19th. Oh, okay. So something to pick you up after the, Christmas festivities, when we get like the January blues or something. Is that a thing?
Yes, and this one's really kind of suspenseful. Not that, all of my books are a little dark, right? But this one's like suspenseful and dark.
Oh, good. Good. Yeah, for January. And then the other one, which we can't talk about, with the girl whose voice sounds like springtime. When's that? Is that for spring sometime? Ironically, is that for release in spring?
Ironically, I'm actually, I haven't done an actual official date, but my guess would be April or May, right? No, April. It'll be April. Springtime, just in time for spring.
Well, her voice is perfect for it.
Her voice is perfect. And it's a 2-word title. I know. Crazy. And I know this sounds weird, but it's actually darker. It's,
Oh.
Can I get much darker than my darkness? I don't know, but I'm going to try.
Yeah, we'll see. And is that the one you're saying that I would be working with you on, or is that a different one altogether?
You're going to be working on one of the books in that series. I do like how I didn't give you I do like how I didn't give you a choice. I said
at gunpoint.
You weren't allowed to bow out. I never forget the time I got an email that your schedule was, I think my New York just popped out on that one, It actually sounded like I was from New York again. My
Schedule.
schedule was a little bit backed up, and you weren't sure if you could do it. And I was like, I don't care. I'm not changing the narrator. I'm not doing anything. I will wait for him. And you're like, oh,
That's
okay.
yes, I do remember that. And that's always very flattering and very nice that
Well,
people,
because I write my books with the narrators in mind.
right.
So, it's not anybody can just, pick up the pick up
Ah,
the role.
that's
So
nice.
that's why you don't have a choice. You've committed
I'm
to me.
in. I'm in.
All the listeners now know that sometime in 2020 or 2021, you're doing another week.
So
See how I
that's a
did
big, but I will. I am committed. With a good heads up, we will 100% make it happen. It would be great. Yours is one of the books I would. No, there are lots of authors that I absolutely will always. I move hell and high water to make happen, to do the job. So we are on that level, which is lovely to have that relationship. So on that lovely note,
now
I'm
that I've like threatened your life, but no big deal.
listen, you said you get dark, so like let's go there. It's been lovely talking to you. So I just want to say thank you very much for giving
Thank you
us
so
your
much for having me.
time. And just to close out this episode, I just have to say a couple of things, which are that I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Audiobook Lovin Podcast. And you can follow us on social media platforms, and you can also subscribe to the Viviana Enchantress of Books newsletter. And also, don't forget that I'm still doing this or that, those questions, that game that is apparently popular. I don't know if you know about that, Ava.
Oh, I do.
Oh, you do. So you can send those in to Viviana, and we'll be doing some more of those in the new year. So Merry Christmas, Ava. Hope you have a lovely festive period, lovely time off.
Yes, happy holidays and have a wonderful new year. And I hope to speak to you soon.
Absolutely. And thanks for listening.
Thank you for joining us on Shane East Meets, an Audiobook Lovin Podcast special series brought to you by Viviana Enchantress of Books. For links and more info about today's episode or the Audiobook Lovin series, visit vivianaenchantressofbooks.com. And please consider leaving a review wherever you listen to the podcast if, and I really hope you did, you enjoyed today's episode.